The moment that almost never happened. The studio lights were blinding that day. People rushed back and forth, shouting instructions, fixing wires, and checking the cameras. It was chaos, the kind of energy that fills every corner of a movie set. In the middle of it all, Keanu Reeves stood quietly, watching, listening. He wasn't supposed to be there that morning. A scheduling mix-up had brought him in hours earlier than needed. No one knew it yet, but that mistake would change everything. The scene they were shooting was complicated. A fast car sequence for the movie that would later make history. Sandra Bullock was already in character, focused, professional, but a little tense. It was one of those days where nothing seemed to go right. The director was losing patience, the stunt team was under pressure, and the crew was exhausted. Keanu noticed all of it. He didn't say a word, but his eyes caught everything. Then it happened. The new stunt driver, nervous and distracted, hit the brakes too late during a rehearsal. A heavy prop car rolled closer than expected. It wasn't a big crash, but the sound was enough to send panic across the set. Sandra froze for a second as the metal scraped the ground, and part of the debris flew dangerously close to where she stood. The entire set fell silent. Keanu moved before anyone else could. He stepped forward, pulled her slightly away, his arm instinctively wrapping around her shoulder. No one was hurt. The crew rushed in. People clapped nervously. Sandra turned to him, a little shaken but smiling. "You always show up when you're not supposed to," she said softly, trying to lighten the moment. He smiled back, humble as always, just lucky timing. But later, when they sat quietly during a break, Sandra looked at him with a different kind of expression. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, recognition. She saw a man who never sought the spotlight, who carried silence like armor, who had seen pain but chose gentleness anyway. "You know," she said, sipping her coffee, "you weren't supposed to be the hero today, but maybe you were meant to be." Her words stayed with him. That night, as the city lights blurred past his car window, Keanu thought about all the moments in his life where he had simply shown up, not because he had to, but because someone needed him to. He thought of the times he had stood alone at the edge of grief, losing people he loved and still choosing kindness over bitterness. Maybe being a hero wasn't about saving the world. Maybe it was about showing up quietly, even when no one expected you to. The next day, Sandra brought him a small paper bag. Inside was a sandwich and a handwritten note, "For the man who shows up when it matters." He smiled, folded the note, and kept it in his jacket pocket. He didn't know then that one simple sentence would later become the line that changed how people saw him forever, not as the action star, not as the movie hero, but as the man whose silence spoke louder than any script ever could. From that day on, something subtle began to shift between them, not romance, but respect, something deeper, something unspoken. Sandra began to watch how he treated everyone on set, the crew, the extras, even the janitor who cleaned the trailers. He never asked for recognition. He just quietly did what was right. And yet, life had more waiting for both of them. A moment that would test who Keanu truly was, and prove that sometimes the real heroes are not written in scripts. They are written in the way they live when no one is watching. The quiet man behind the curtain. Days after the accident felt strangely calm. Everyone had returned to their rhythm, but Sandra noticed something. Keanu was always around, early, quiet, and never asking for credit. While others rested between takes, he helped move props, offered bottled water to the lighting crew, or sat with the background actors who often felt invisible. No cameras captured those moments. He never wanted them to. One morning, Sandra arrived earlier than usual. She saw Keanu sitting on a wooden box, talking softly with a young technician whose eyes were red from crying. Sandra stopped, pretending to check her phone, but she listened. The girl had lost her father the night before, but didn't want to miss work. Keanu didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss." Instead, he said, "Take a walk, breathe, and when you come back, I'll be here." The girl nodded, tears falling. Sandra watched as he gave her his breakfast sandwich and stayed with her until she smiled again. Later, during a short break, Sandra asked, "How do you do it? How do you stay so calm when everyone's losing it?" He looked at her, thoughtful. "When you've lost enough," he said softly, You stopped running from pain. You learned to walk with it. She didn't ask what he meant, but something in his voice carried years of quiet grief. She could see it, the kind that changes people, but also shapes them into something stronger. The production continued. One afternoon, as they prepared to shoot the most dangerous scene, the director argued with the stunt team. Sandra was worried. She had to drive the bus again, this time with real explosions nearby. She looked at Keanu. He smiled, calm as ever, but she could tell he was watching every detail. After the take, when the bus stopped perfectly, the director shouted, "That's it. Perfect." The crew clapped, but Sandra's hands were trembling. Keanu walked over, placed his jacket around her shoulders, and whispered, "You did great. Breathe now." It wasn't the words, it was the tone. Steady, grounding, like safety in human form. Weeks later, they wrapped filming. The movie was done, but something remained between them. An invisible understanding built on respect and truth. When the premiere night came, people were buzzing. Flashes from cameras filled the air. Sandra looked stunning, smiling for interviews. Reporters swarmed Keanu, asking about fame, action, and success. He answered simply, always bringing the focus back to the crew, the team, the work, never himself. One reporter asked, "People say you're the real-life hero on set. Do you agree?" He paused, then smiled. "Heroes are the ones who keep going even when no one sees them. Like the girl who lost her father but showed up. Like the crew who never quit. I just try to be there." Sandra watched from a few steps away, her heart tightening. She realized that behind every headline and every fan's praise, Keanu carried something deeper. A constant reminder that kindness wasn't weakness, and humility wasn't silence. It was strength in its purest form. After the event, as they sat on the steps outside the theater, away from the crowd, Sandra turned to him and said, "You weren't supposed to be the hero, remember?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe no one is. Maybe we just become one when the moment needs it." That night, as he walked away through the soft glow of the city lights, Sandra watched him disappear into the crowd. She felt something shift, not just admiration, but an awakening. Sometimes, it takes one quiet soul to remind the world that greatness doesn't come from noise, but from grace. But the story wasn't over yet. Months later, when tragedy struck someone close to him again, the world would see what kind of man Keanu really was, and how one sentence from Sandra would come back to define him in a way no movie ever could. Asterisk. The loss that no one saw coming. Months had passed since the movie wrapped. The lights faded, the posters came down, and everyone moved on to their next projects. But for Keanu, something in life had quietly shifted. He had been smiling more on set those last days, as if he had finally found peace. But no one knew how fragile that peace really was. Then, one winter morning, the news came. Someone close to him, a quiet, gentle woman he loved, was gone. It wasn't sudden, but it still broke him in ways no one could see. The world didn't know about it, not yet. He didn't want it to. He didn't believe in making pain public. Instead, he disappeared for a while, slipping away from premieres, cameras, and events. Sandra noticed his absence first. She called a few times, left short messages. "Hey, it's me. Just checking in." No answer. She knew better than to push. But one night, after weeks of silence, she found a letter waiting at her apartment door. It was from Keanu, written in his simple, careful handwriting. "Thank you," it began, "for reminding me that heroes can be quiet too. I'm learning to walk again, one day at a time." There was no signature, just a small pressed flower inside, the kind you'd find by the roadside, unnoticed by most. Sandra held it for a long time. She knew he was grieving, and she also knew he would never ask for help. People like him carried their pain like a secret language, one that only a few could read. Weeks later, fate crossed their paths again. A charity event was being held downtown to raise funds for children who had lost parents. Sandra had agreed to host it. To her surprise, Keanu walked in quietly near the end. His hair longer, his eyes softer but older somehow. He smiled when he saw her. "You came," she said, her voice breaking into a smile. "You invited me," he replied, "and besides, this is where I should be." He didn't speak on stage that night. Instead, he sat with the kids, listening to their stories, drawing little doodles with them on napkins, laughing softly. The photographers tried to capture it, but somehow, the most beautiful moments happened when no one was ready. One little boy asked him, "Are you a real superhero?" Keanu smiled and said, "No, I'm just someone who knows what sadness feels like." After the event, as the guests were leaving, Sandra found him standing alone near the piano. He was tracing the edge of the keys without playing them. "You could have been up there," she said. "The world wants to hear your voice." He looked at her. "The world doesn't need my voice. It needs kindness." "That's louder than anything I could say." Sandra nodded, but inside, her heart ached. She wanted to tell him how much he had already done, how his quietness had healed people just by being real. Instead, she whispered, "You weren't supposed to be the hero, but you keep becoming one anyway." He smiled faintly, almost shyly. "Then maybe you're the reason." That sentence stayed with her for years, because after that night, he started to do small, hidden acts that the media would only discover later, donating to hospitals under other names, sending letters of encouragement to strangers, helping crew members who had lost their homes. But there was one thing no one saw coming, one choice that would change how the world saw him forever. And it all started when someone found a small folded note in a book he donated, written in his familiar handwriting. The note simply said, "For whoever finds this, remember, even the quietest life can echo through others. Don't stop being kind, even when no one notices." The story of that note spread faster than any movie promotion ever could. People began to see him differently, not just as an actor, but as something more human, more real. And yet, when reporters asked him later if he had written it, Keanu only smiled and said, "Some stories are better when you don't know who wrote them." He didn't realize it then, but that moment would lead to one of the most emotional reunions of his life, when he and Sandra would find themselves together again, years later, in a place neither of them expected. The reunion that no one expected. Years passed quietly. Keanu had returned to work, but fame no longer meant what it once did. He went to movie sets the way some people go to church, with humility, not pride. He still rode the subway, still gave up his seat, still spoke softly. To most people, he seemed like a mystery wrapped in calm. But to Sandra, who had once looked into his eyes on that chaotic film set years ago, he was simply the same man, unchanged by success, unshaken by fame. Then one autumn morning, Sandra received a call. A director she knew wanted her to consider a new film. It was quiet, thoughtful, built around loss and second chances. "We're talking to Keanu too," the director said. Her breath caught for a second. "Keanu Reeves." "Yes," he said, laughing. "You two together again. It would be magic." She didn't answer right away. After hanging up, she sat in silence, remembering their last conversation, that charity night, and his words, "The world doesn't need my voice. It needs kindness." Part of her wanted to see him again. Another part was afraid. Sometimes the people who teach you the most about life are also the ones who remind you of your own broken pieces. Weeks later, she arrived on set for the first read-through. The air smelled of coffee and fresh paint. Scripts lay neatly on the long table. She was early, but not early enough, because when she walked in, Keanu was already there, sitting at the end, reading quietly. He looked up, and for a second, it felt like time folded, like the years between them had never existed. He stood up, his smile small but warm. "Hey," he said softly. She smiled back. "You still come too early. Some habits never leave." He replied. They sat across from each other, both pretending to focus on their lines, but the air between them was full of unspoken memories. During the reading, their characters shared a heartbreaking scene. To people reconnecting after years of silence, when Sandra spoke the line, "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," her voice trembled for real. And when Keanu answered, "I was always around, just not where you could see me," everyone in the room fell silent. After the session, the director looked emotional. "That," he said, "that's what real connection looks like." Later, when the crew packed up, Keanu and Sandra walked outside. The evening light painted everything gold. "You know," he said, "I almost didn't take this project." "Why not?" she asked. "I thought maybe the past should stay where it belongs." "And now?" she asked gently. He smiled. "Now I think some people are worth revisiting." They went for coffee after that. Nothing fancy, just two old friends in a small cafe, talking about life, loss, and the strange way time softens even the sharpest pain. She asked if he still kept that note she gave him years ago, the one that said, "For the man who shows up when it matters." He nodded. "I do," he said. "It reminds me that being present is enough." The movie they made together became something special, not because of fame, but because every scene felt like truth. People said they could feel the emotion between them, like something real was happening behind the words. And maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't about love in the romantic sense, but about something deeper, two souls who had walked through fire and found peace standing next to each other again on the last day of filming. As the final shot ended, the crew clapped. Keanu hugged Sandra longer than before, as if saying thank you without words. She whispered, "You weren't supposed to be the hero, but you keep proving me wrong." He smiled. "Maybe I'm just learning from you." That night, as the credits rolled for the first private screening, there was a quiet dedication on the screen. No one knew who wrote it. It simply said, "For those who keep showing up, even when no one notices." Sandra looked at him across the dark room. He didn't say a word, but she knew it was his. What happened next would take the quiet man and the woman who believed in him to a place neither had planned: a hospital room, a sick child, and a moment that would make the world stop and truly see who Keanu Reeves was. The day the world finally saw him, movie's success wasn't measured by numbers. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it became something deeper, a quiet masterpiece. People said it felt real, that it reminded them of grief, healing, and hope. Keanu and Sandra attended the premiere together, smiling shyly as fans cheered. But the loudest noise wasn't in the theater, it was online, where people began sharing stories of the small acts of kindness Keanu had done over the years. One person wrote, "He sat next to me on a bus once, and he gave up his seat for a stranger." Another said, "He helped me push my car when it broke down, and I didn't even realize it was him until later." But one story would change everything. It began with a young boy named Liam. He was 8, fighting a rare illness, and his dream was to meet his favorite actor, Keanu Reeves. The hospital reached out to his team quietly, not expecting a reply. But within 2 days, Keanu showed up. No cameras, no headlines, no red carpet. He just walked into the hospital, carrying a small box wrapped in blue paper. Sandra heard about it later, but that day, only a few nurses saw what happened. Keanu sat beside Liam's bed, listening as the boy talked about his dream to be brave like in the movies. Keanu smiled gently. "You already are," he said. "I just pretend to be brave." Then he handed him the box. Inside was a small toy bus, the same kind from the movie that made Keanu and Sandra famous years ago. Except this one had words written in marker underneath. "Heroes come in all sizes." Liam laughed softly. "Are you the real hero?" Keanu shook his head. "No, kid, you are." He stayed for hours, talking to the boy, holding his hand when the pain got worse, never once checking the time. A nurse later said that when Liam fell asleep, Keanu just sat there quietly, staring out the window, whispering something under his breath. No one could hear what he said, but they saw him wipe a tear away. When Liam passed away weeks later, his mother posted a picture online, her son holding the toy bus, smiling weakly. The post read, "He called him his real hero, and for once, I think he was right." The story spread across the world. Headlines appeared overnight. Keanu Reeves visits dying fan in secret. The quiet hero who never wanted attention. Reporters flooded him with questions. For the first time, he agreed to a short interview. When asked why he did it, he looked down for a long moment, then said softly, "Because sometimes being human is the only role that matters." Sandra watched the interview from her living room. She felt her throat tighten, tears stinging her eyes. She called him right after. "You know the world finally sees you now, right?" He laughed quietly. "I don't want them to see me. I want them to see what matters." "And what's that?" she asked. "Kindness," he said. "It's the only thing that outlives us." That night, As he walked home through the quiet streets of Los Angeles, a group of young fans stopped him. One girl said, "You're the hero who helps everyone." Keanu smiled. "I'm just trying to be who I needed when I was your age." Meanwhile, Sandra had an idea. She reached out to the producers of their last film and proposed something small but powerful: a foundation in Liam's name to help children fighting illnesses. Keanu didn't just agree, he became its first anonymous donor, and when they launched it publicly, the opening speech wasn't given by him or Sandra. It was given by one of the hospital nurses who had witnessed that quiet visit. She ended her speech with the same words Liam had whispered before falling asleep that day. "He wasn't supposed to be the hero, but he became mine." The crowd stood in silence. Sandra looked over at Keanu. His head was bowed, eyes wet, but his smile was peaceful. The moment didn't belong to fame or fortune. It belonged to humanity. But fate, as always, had one last surprise waiting: a letter written in a child's uneven handwriting that would bring him to tears and close a circle that began years ago with Sandra's simple words. The letter that closed the circlite was late evening when Keanu found the envelope in his mailbox. There was no return address, just his name written in uneven letters. He opened it slowly, thinking it was another fan letter, but when he saw the handwriting inside, his hands trembled. It was from Liam's mother. The letter read, "Dear Reeves, Liam used to say that you reminded him of peace. The night before he passed, he asked me to write this for him because he was too tired to hold a pen. He said, 'Tell Keanu that I'm not scared anymore. Tell him he made me brave. Tell him I'll keep showing up, even in the stars.'" Tears fell quietly onto the page. For a long time, Keanu just sat there, holding that letter against his chest. The city outside was noisy, but inside his home, there was a calm that felt sacred. He read it again and again until the words felt like a whisper from somewhere far away, gentle, warm, eternal. The next day, he visited the small park where Liam's family had planted a tree in his memory. Sandra joined him, carrying a white rose. They stood there for a while, watching the leaves move with the wind. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. After a long silence, Sandra said softly, "Do you remember what I told you years ago?" He looked at her and nodded, "That I wasn't supposed to be the hero." She smiled through tears. "And you still became one." He shook his head. "No, Liam was the hero. I just learned from him. You both were," she whispered. "You just didn't know it." They sat on the bench nearby as the sun began to set, golden light falling between the trees. People walked by without recognizing them, and somehow that made the moment even more real. "You ever think about all the people you've helped?" Sandra asked quietly. "Sometimes," he said, "but I think about the ones I couldn't help even more." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "You helped more than you know. Maybe not with fame or money, but with how you make people feel safe, just by being who you are." He smiled gently. "I guess that's all any of us can do, make the world a little softer." They stayed there until the park lights came on. Before leaving, he took the white rose from Sandra's hand and placed it under the small plaque with Liam's name. "Thank you for teaching me how to show up," he whispered. Months later, during a rare public talk, someone from the audience asked Keanu, "What keeps you grounded after everything you've achieved?" He paused, smiled faintly, and said, "A long time ago, someone told me I wasn't supposed to be the hero. But I think we all are, in small ways, not with fame, not with strength, but with kindness. You don't need to save the world. Sometimes, showing up for one person is enough." The room went silent. Some people wiped their eyes, and that clip, those simple words, went viral around the world. Millions watched, not because of who he was, but because of what he said. Weeks later, Sandra sent him a small package. Inside was a frame with 2 pieces of paper. One was her old note from years ago, for the man who shows up when it matters. The other was Liam's letter, carefully copied in her handwriting. Beneath them, she had added a new line of her own: "Heroes aren't born in stories. They are made in the moments no one sees." He placed it by his window, beside the light that always stayed on through the night. Sometimes he'd glance at it before leaving for work, or after coming home from a long day. It reminded him that even in silence, Even in loss, love could echo louder than pain. And so, the man who was never supposed to be the hero became one. Not by saving the world, but by saving the parts of it that still believed in goodness. That's how Keanu Reeves lived, quietly, gently, with a heart that never stopped showing up.